Good evening, folks. Good evening. Good evening. It is so good to be back with you for another conversation on Ignite, our weekly podcast, hosted and presented, sponsored by St. Mark United Methodist Church in Wichita, Kansas, the community of possibilities and transformation. And we're back with you again. Let me give you a heads up. I think Pastor Yolanda, you will miss her this evening. She's traveling. The AKAs, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, are having one of their regional events, and I've got several people who are that I know in the Wichita area who are either traveling or preparing to travel to their regional event. So you will miss her if you tuned in, and Pastor Yolanda is the reason you tune in. Hold on, she'll be back next week, hopefully. But thank you for tuning in. If you're watching right now, I would encourage you, if you are a fan of Ignite, to share tonight's broadcast on your page. Just share it to your page, and then invite your circle of friends and your circle of influence. Invite them to come on and be a part of our conversation tonight. We have a native Wichitan on with us, a gentleman who was introduced to me by someone who's one of my favorite people on planet Earth. He's one of my favorite people in the Milky Way. Let me expand that. Not just planet Earth, in the whole Milky Way. He's one of my favorite people. And he himself is a brilliant person, but he introduced me to this gentleman, and lo and behold, he's right here from Wichita, but he's traveled all over the world, done amazing stuff. Consulting. He is an expert in world African history. Part of his consulting work, he does some engagement in something that's very important for me, what he calls active listening. So we're going to talk to him about active listening and how important that is. We'll talk to him about it and try to talk about how that applies to friendships, marriages, family, as well as organizations, even local churches. So very excited about our conversation tonight. Let me bring on our one of our normal, usual co-hosts, Pastor Kyle. Good evening, sir.
You described me as normal. I'm a normal co-host. I'm not sure about Yolanda and Kai,
You you
but
are the normal co-host. They
but
are.
Yolanda is why I tune in as a host. So
Well, give us grace and hang in here with us tonight. If it goes downhill, just do what we do in the black church, Kyle. Just hold up a finger like that and tip out the side. Just like and hold up a finger and tip out the side door. I shouldn't crack that joke because Paul James is probably going to rip that to pieces as to why people do that, where that came from. I've heard I don't know if they're true. I've heard some of the stories about how that whole thing developed in the African American church. This whole Anyway, let me bring on Mark before we lose our guest that we have on. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Ignite, Mr. Mark McCormick, who's a regular with us. So Kyle is normal and Mark is regular.
Well, Mark is abnormal. So and you're one of my favorite people in the cosmos. There you go.
I'm so glad you said that. With Kyle here, on one of the time with Kyle, I needed Kyle to hear that. I need him to hear that.
yeah, I will say, Mark has been on several times, but last week was the first time I've ever been on with Mark.
Oh,
what?
On Ignite.
Wow.
You've been boycotting me?
I guess so. I don't know. It is just, yeah.
Well, so then but now how just what a brilliant soul and mind he is. Mark has a million great stories, just like great, unbelievable stories. I get home. I got to tell you this, Mark. I get home last week from Ignite, and I walk in, and my wife says, what a fascinating person."
So you're talking about you or me?
Talking about you. She's like, he just like has the most amazing experiences and stories. And I was like, well, we all do. What Mark does so well is that it's like he has a photographic memory. He remembers stories, both personal experiences and experiences of others, and with detail that most folks don't. And then he can share those stories. And he's a great storyteller. He's a journalist, of course.
I gotta cut in and say, however smart you think I am, this brother we have on tonight is next level. I'm just telling you.
Wow. Well, let's bring him on. I've been talked about him on Sunday, sending out text messages and emails telling people, make sure you don't miss tonight. Telling folks who are native Wichitans, this is one of your very own. Let's bring him on, Mr. Paul James. Paul, welcome to Ignite, sir.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm enjoying this camaraderie. This brotherhood is phenomenal. I mean, This is really passionate, very real, and I am grateful. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being on. So this is what I want to do. I am going to, with Pastor Yolanda not being here, I'm going to play Pastor Yolanda tonight. Okay. I'm going to play Pastor Yolanda. I'm going to navigate the system and bring it all together with notes and pictures and figures and bring the conversation together. Mm-hmm. And I've asked Kyle and Mark to lead our conversation, our interview with Paul. So let's dive in. I will ask the first question. Number one, how are you? And can you tell me about something, at least one thing that has you very excited about life right now?
I am doing well. I reside here in North Carolina. I'm short distance, driving distance to the ocean and the mountains.
Wow.
I enjoy this moderate climate. I enjoy the trees. I am doing well. I made a decision, gentlemen, to consciously live my life gracefully. Not perfectly, but gracefully.
Wow.
And by that, I just mean putting myself in environment and places where I can be as whole as possible while being in community. What I'm excited about is in this moment, being with you guys, being with St. Mark Church, being with your audience, being able to contribute to a conversation about human difference that I hope I will be able to learn and share and grow from. That's what I'm excited about.
Wow.
I want you to know that I have a tendency to be extremely methodical in my messaging about this subject matter, because I think that that's something that in a contemporary sense we're missing out on, and that is, how do we be in community, be methodical, be empathetic, and be compassionate.
Wow.
And so I'm going to do my very best to engage your audience that way. And I can only once again say thank you for allowing me to be here. But I'm just excited to be in community with this group as I have reviewed and looked at some of your previous interviews. So that's what I'm excited about.
Wow. What an opening. What's the guy's name who the black guy that used to be an anchor on the Today Show, the morning show, the Today Show?
Brian Gumbel.
Brian Gumbel. Brian Gumbel once received an award from an NAACP award, and his reception speech was so brilliant that it changed how I saw preaching, how I saw journalism, how I saw language. It was just, it was absolutely. As a matter of fact, I don't know if it's on Google, if it's on the internet somewhere. You folks can look it up. But in like 2 minutes, it was just methodical, but brilliant and gracious. And I'm like, wow, like this guy. And and that's what you just did, Paul. I just gotta tell you, you just did.
Well,
In your opening statement, you just did the same thing. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Well, let me just say this also in terms of clarity. I believe that one of the reasons why we were very successful in what the country calls the civil rights movement, but what James Baldwin called the second insurrection, is because we had clarity of speech. We had clarity of speech coming from people like Dr. King, Malcolm X, Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune. You know where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
Clarity of speech and agreeable and disagreeable speech, depending on where you were on that continuum.
Right. Wow. Wow. Mark, hey, let's time out. Mark McCormick. Dude.
I told you. We don't play around, man.
My God.
We don't play around. This is who I go to for advice.
Wow.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Wow. Let's jump into the interview. Mark and Kyle, I'm turning it over to you guys, and I am going to navigate the background. I just wanted to show some of the comments that are already coming in. So folks are already picking up on phrases and words from you, Paul. And then, of course, that's my mom, Paul. She watches. I'm sure she's excited about you, but I think part of the reason she watches every Wednesday is because she's just like trying to encourage her son. But I think she's excited about you too.
Totally.
So absolutely. So let's jump into our conversation and make the most of tonight.
Yeah, well, I'll ask. I'll get things kicked off a little bit. I think a lot of people know who you are, but I'm not familiar with you. I would love to know just sort of the story of who you are and what brings you here, just to give us a good overview of who you are.
Well, I am made and a product of Wichita, Kansas. Proud of that. Whether I'm in the Congo, Central Africa, or Grenada, wherever I travel. I'm a Wichitan by nature, produced by all the sensibilities of Northeast Wichita by way of Ninth and Grove, different era, different time. Proud of that. I had a very large family there at one time. My grandmother and grandfather moved to Wichita, Kansas in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and they had 14 children. So the James family was a big family in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I'm a product of 259 by way of Chisholm Trail, Buckner, Jardine, Curtis, Southeast. Probably spent a little bit too much time playing basketball. The whole sports narrative that we come up in and grow up in was shaped by some very, very, very profound people, some by design and some by accident. Ultimately got my undergraduate degree at Wichita State under retired professor Dr. John Gaston, who ran the ethnic studies department at Wichita State for many years. The man who gave me what I call the mainstream orientation to being a professional and being a Black man in that context. And while at that same time, I had an opportunity to be shaped and groomed by the Honorable Jihad Muqtasid at ICRA International Books and Gift Store, under the second leadership of his daughter, Maskela Thomas. And so I had the best of both worlds in my early 20s, which I think is important. I decided that I wanted to make my life journey in terms of my career in understanding and knowing how human beings arrive at knowing. And we call that pretty much epistemology formation. And that is to say, every human being arrives at knowing based on some larger cultural meta narrative that teaches them how to behave. And I decided I wanted to take that up as a career path. And so that led me to be on college campuses for nearly 26 years. 100% of that time was in diversity and intercultural and diversity and intercultural management. I served at places like Wichita State out of the gate, left Wichita and moved to the Pacific Northwest, Oregon State, left the state of Oregon and moved to Cincinnati, Ohio at Xavier University, the PWI, or predominantly white institution, and left there and went to a small Methodist school called Baldwin Wallace University in Cleveland as the chief diversity officer. Left there and went to a well-known Methodist institution, United Methodist Institution, Duke University in Durham. And there I served as the assistant vice president for diversity, equity, inclusion, both on the healthcare and on the university side. Now, behind the scenes, I'm being very active in Black think tanks. I'm being very active in movements with respect to the historicity of Black people and their contributions on the planet. And so I am very proud to have what I call a dual career, in that I've been able to serve the components of mainstream diversity efforts while working to ensure that African people on the planet are finally getting their due or just in what I call the sun. And that's critically important. I'm proud to say that as a Wichitan, I've done that in such a way that I haven't had to denigrate other people. I've done it in such a way where I've created community around knowledge of self. I've done it in such a way that I've been both a learner and a teacher. I've done it in such a way that it has served me and my family quite well. That's my Wichita story. I get back home twice a year. I always look forward to coming home. I still have family there. cousins. You know, my in-laws are still there, and I just enjoy coming home. Wichita is the place that I can never get lost in. And no matter how much Wichita changes, I know where I'm at and I know where I'm going. And that feels good. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah. That's interesting about, Wichita is the place you'll never get lost in, because it's there's sort of a sameness to it, huh?
Yeah. And let me say this. I never wanted to leave home. I remember the day I left Wichita, packing up to go to the state of Oregon. My wife cried. My mom cried uncontrollably. I never wanted to leave Wichita, but Mark, I think you wrote about this many years ago. The Black Brain Drain.
Yeah.
In Wichita, Kansas, is very real. It's very unfortunate, but I never saw myself being able to exercise my career in the way that I wanted to. It being or remaining there in Wichita. That being said, it has always been my compass.
Well, you know, Paul, I wrote about the Black Brain Drain, and I also wrote like some dueling stories about white flight and black flight. And the brain drain, that's people leaving the state. Black flight are people leaving communities. And one of the things I wanted to ask tonight, knowing that you'd be here, but I didn't know I'd be co-hosting, but I'm thrilled because I got lots of questions. But a couple of things, you know, wherever I've lived, I always gravitated to a community of people, young black people who were Afrocentric. And that's how I ended up at ICRA, and that's where I met you. And the more you learn about Wichita history, you know, one of the local African American royalty in Wichita, Charles McAfee, always says that per capita, we've produced more great people, perhaps than any other town in the country. You know, per capita. You're talking about Donald Hollowell, who was Martin Luther King's lawyer. You're talking about a host of people, right? Where did your Afrocentrism come from? What's your journey to that?
I'm going to slightly, my friend, redirect your language. I have never considered myself Afrocentric as much as I've considered myself striving to be African-centered.
Okay.
Wow.
Make the distinction for me.
Distinction, yes.
We learned very early in Knowledge of Self that to be Afrocentric, in some ways, in some contexts, is to seek to blackify the world in a way that through Eurocentrism, whites have made their world. We don't want to play that game.
Wow.
I don't want to ever be in a situation where I'm talking about the history of black folk, and everything that's good that's happened in history was done by blacks, and everything that's bad has been done by the cultural other. So we make a slight distinction there between African-centered and Afrocentrism. Now, Mark, I understand as you asked the question in terms of the history of the intellectual movement, what you meant by Afrocentrism, because I would also throw in Pan-Africanism.
Yes.
So I understand what you meant by that statement. But the more we grow into the knowledge of self, we are seeking to see the world through African-centered eyes. And let me give you a foundation for what it means to see the world through African-centered eyes. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." We call that rugged individualism. However, in the spirit of the African continent, no matter what tribe or nation, no matter what village, the spirit of Ubuntu, I am because we are because I am, embodies what it fundamentally means to be an African. And it's that sticking point right there. It's that sticking point that leads to the philosophy of being African-centered in the context of having a Pan-African overview in terms of what I think and feel would best serve African people on the planet. I also don't see people and organizations locally. I see them nationally and globally.
Wow.
I can't afford
Wow.
to see the American Black problem as a North American problem. I can't afford to see poverty as an American problem. I can't afford to see a disrespect of nature
Wow.
as an American problem. These are human problems impacting the planet that we live on.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. How did you arrive there?
At the African-centered piece, or the Afrocentrum, or the humanist, what particular point are you asking?
Your African-centeredness, if I'm saying that correctly.
Oh, absolutely. Well, for 6.5 years, I sit at the feet of Jihad in a community of elders.
Share a little bit about Jihad for those people who don't know him. For those of us who know him, we love him. But share a little bit about his background and who he was.
Well, AKA Jerry Rounds, AKA a small business owner in Northeast Wichita for many years. And he finally hit the intellectual jackpot and opened up ICRA with his wife, Miss Tassalim, as we say, and his daughter, Maskela. And I am so fortunate. I couldn't have planned this. And Maskela and I, we often talk about this. I was a part of the original study group of that bookstore. And I'll tell you, I was in my early 20s. I went into that bookstore as naive as they come. I went into that bookstore thinking that the only solution for this ugly problem that we call racism is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boy, did I have a rude awakening. When I came out of that bookstore, I realized that Dr. King was just a spoke in a wheel where people who look like me were seeking freedom, justice, and equality. And Dr. King was just one of those many voices. What it meant fundamentally was walking in there in the absence of the classwork. What it meant was the conversations, the books, people coming from all different swaths of the community, church folks coming in, nationalists coming in, Christians coming in, Muslims coming in, women coming in, men coming in. It meant a certain smell, incense. Mm-hmm. It meant a special spiced tea that they would serve. It meant shea butter long before shea butter you could buy it at Target. It meant John Coltrane. It meant Sarah Vaughan. It meant Mahalia Jackson. It meant James Cleveland, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad. It meant so much, and it was right on time. It wasn't always well received. I wasn't always well received going there, but I knew that I had a greater calling to be around those elders because I knew the one thing they understood that I think is often missing today is the cliche, readers are leaders. Last year, and I don't say this braggadociously, but I had a mission to read 40 books. I read 41.
Wow.
That comes out of my ICRA orientation. I have nobody imposing that on me. Mm-hmm. I have no one asking. That's not a part of a curriculum. Mm-hmm. That's understanding that I learned through Dr. Anna Chandler and John Gaston and Jerry Shaw at Wichita State and others, and through Jihad and through others and Maskela. I learned that you're only an individual can only rise higher than their personal library. Wow. I don't care what you say. You can only rise high. You can't rise higher than your personal library. You got to put in the work.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the things that I really loved about Jihad. I wrote a profile of him, and the photograph that we used was him in front of these absolutely stuffed bookshelves. He had bookshelves everywhere. He had books absolutely everywhere. And there was something about his smile and his sweetness and his spirit that made him a teacher. So I get the sense that you were pretty close to grown as you were being introduced to these ideas, correct?
Oh, I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
I was in my early 20s, set to come out of Wichita State. Another fun story that will humanize me even more. Around the same time, I met my wife, Virginia Williams. We had a class together with Dr. John Gaston. There's a lot of things going on in my life at that time, and they're all coming together to produce what I call an individual that is prepared for the world and to be comfortable with self. What I wish more than anything for human beings as individuals is to be comfortable with self. No matter what the setting, no matter what the time,
Wow.
no matter what the circumstances, being comfortable with self is freeing. It feels so good. It's the life of something that we strive for, to be comfortable with self. So many people that I've met, when you peel back the onion, the thing that they're most uncomfortable with is self.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like the scripture, you can't love your neighbor unless you love yourself.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So just a quick question for you, Paul. Do you find that struggle for self-love, self-acceptance? Do you find that it's transracial, that it crosses race, that's you find that in all racial groups, all ethnic groups? Or do you, and if so, but is it more profound among Black people in America?
I think it is found in all human beings, because all human beings come into this world not knowing, and we come into the knowledge. And so a degree of uncomfortability with self is natural. Now, I do think that Black people, given the last 400 years of history, not only are we oftentimes uncomfortable with self, but then we lack knowledge of self. You have to understand this, and I'm going to be using some names that you may or may not be familiar with in history, but we have to understand, if Elijah Muhammad did nothing right except he took criminals and turned them into ministers. He took prostitutes and turned them into queens. He did that, my friends, because he gave them knowledge of self and self-confidence. And so he takes Malcolm Little and turns him into Malcolm X. And we know Malcolm X as an international phenomenon who later becomes El-Hajj Malik Shabazz. But it's that orientation that Elijah Muhammad gave him around knowledge of self that is so critically important. Critically important.
So
yes.
I'm sorry, Paul, how does this knowledge of self factor into a lot of the work that you've done over the years in your diversity work?
Well, the knowledge of self in my own diversity work, Mark, has given me the tool to start off at Wichita State and end up at Duke. That's a world of difference, my friend.
I would imagine.
Remember I said that no matter what room, table, or environment in, I'm comfortable. Now, learning the discipline of diversity through my undergraduate and graduate work gave me the ability to become a diversity practitioner. And as one of the questions says here, now I'm able to help leaders, executive leaders, mid-management leaders, think through the best diversity strategies for how they want their curriculum to look, how they want their organizations to look, how they want their teams to look, etc. But I first had that understanding of who I am at the table, and that was informed and shaped long before I got to some of these spaces and places. The other thing I was willing to do was move around. And Mark, I know you, and Pastor, I know you you guys have moved around. You haven't been stationary. And when you move around and live in different parts of the world, or different parts of the country, you smell different roses. You see different things. You notice different things. And I think that becomes critically important. Now, here's the imperative that shaped my diversity work from a mainstream perspective. I wanted to know how arrangements were made. I wanted to know who set up patriarchy, who set up racism, who set up classism, who set up all these arrangements that say that these kind of people behave like this, and this is the school you have to go to. If you're a woman, this, if you're a man, this, if you're black, this, if you're Asian, this. Because I always knew that any arrangement that is made can be unmade. And that's where I found my calling, helping institutions decouple years and decades of what I call institutional betrayal, of what I call opportunity hoarding, of what I call not seeing the full spectrum of humanity in key spaces and key places. Now, I know full well what I'm working up against, because still, the old adage is the most separated hour in America is Sunday mornings in the church. We haven't figured out how to unite ourselves in terms of our faith. We typically still live differently and separately. So we got a lot of work to do. And I saw myself for 26 years before I started Lighthouse Strategy Consulting, being able to help institutions get to those spaces and get to those places. I hit some home runs, I hit some base hits, and I hit some foul balls. And probably my greatest tragedy, my opinion of myself, is I was never able to serve, at least up to now, at an HBCU, which would have meant the world to me. I feel like at some point in my 2016 year tenure in the academy, a few of those years could have been better spent, and maybe at a Morehouse or a Fisk or a Hampton. You get what I'm saying. Nonetheless, I think I was successful on predominantly white campuses. That's just something that has always swirled in the back of my head. What would have Paul James been like in the space of a Benjamin Mays, or in a place like Tuskegee where the great Booker T. Washington built, et cetera, et cetera.
Again, as I was going to navigate, but I got two questions on. So I'd like to hear from you. Who is there one particular person from African American history who has had the most? Who is the person who has had the most profound impact on your thought, your thinking, you as a person? So that's one question. Then I'll save my second question because I want to ask you about a couple of books that are behind you. But let's start with the first question.
If you would have asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have indisputably said the Honorable Malcolm X.
Wow.
5 years ago, I would have said Minister Malcolm. He's the best that we produce from the streets to the debate stage.
Yeah.
That would have been my answer 5 years ago. But now I'm going to couple that question with two people that I think deserve a great deal of more study and more time and energy. And one is Master Teacher Mary McLeod Bethune.
Wow.
And the other is the Honorable Booker T. Washington. Now, why do I say those two individuals now as I sit here today at 53 years old? Both of those individuals left us institutions. Like it or not, like their ethos or not, both of them understood bricks and mortar. And when even the Honorable Marcus Garvey didn't leave us a standing building, as great as he was, he didn't leave us one standing building. As we reappraise our history in this country and what we did right and what we did wrong, I think we have to begin to re-examine people who left us hardcore evidence of how to achieve in this participatory democracy in such a way that we're capitalizing on our share in this market. and the Tuskegee Institute model and the model that Mary McLeod Bethune left us were absolutely brilliant. And both of those two individuals, even though they're long gone from us, they've transitioned, both are still graduating Black people. Not even W.E.B. Du Bois can say that.
That's right.
Not even Malcolm X can say that. James Baldwin can't say that. I can go on. And this is not either or, it's both and. But when you ask me, who do I look back and have had the most impact upon my thinking, those two individuals resonate extremely high.
Wow. What a great answer. And I would love to dig into that. But I want to ask you, talk about Paul Laurence Dunbar, Lorraine Hansberry, their influence on you. So you have that books propped up there, which means that those stand out, because I'm sure you read 41 books just last year, 1 year. But those two books are standing. What is it about those two people? Are those, maybe it's those particular books?
I learned in the bookstore at ICRA that one way to not be a male chauvinist is to, when you present and when you're public, always show the male and female side of the best of your works.
Wow.
So that's number one.
Wow.
We can never mimic. We must stop mimicking our oppressors and always thinking that our orientation publicly is masculine and male. So you see Lorraine Hansberry behind me because she's underread, underappreciated. I believe she transitioned in her early 30s of pancreatic cancer. We lost her very young, but she wrote A Raisin in the Sun before she was 30 years old. Genius. Genius of a woman. And she spoke truth to power doing it. She was so close to Malcolm X, as his life is coming to an end, according to the biography, he actually snuck into her room and paid his last respects, ultimately to only lose his life.
Wow.
Not long after.
Wow.
She was brilliant. And interesting enough, she was middle class. That's another dimension. Paul Laurence Dunbar was a brilliant man. Parents were enslaved. But he was that generation of writers through poetry who gave us hope at a time where we were not far removed from chains. Brilliant people who dared to speak their truths in the face of so much danger and so much trauma. So, two books that I admire, two beautiful people, but not perfect people.
Right.
You see, sometimes we think to be in the public space, we have to arrive perfectly. No, we have to arrive human and do the best that we can with the circumstances that we've been given. To my right or to my left and your right, I guess, which vice versa, is a book on Bilal. Bilal ibn Rabah. I'm not sure if your listeners have any knowledge of the history of al-Islam. I am not a Muslim, but I have somewhat of an introductory level of knowledge about the role of Islam and the Hebrew faith. And by that I mean from Abraham to Muhammad. What most people do not know is that early Islam could not have functioned without the involvement of Blacks. Now, I need the listener to understand. Now, I'm not talking about the Nation of Islam now. I'm talking about Islam orthodoxy. Could not have survived without the role of Blacks in that religion. Chief among those roles is Bilal. He's the man, the Ethiopian, that the Prophet Muhammad asked to do the first call to prayer in Islam. 5 times a day, as we think about Ramadan. 5 times a day, Muslims turn toward Mecca and the Kaaba and they pray. And the first man to do that call to prayer is Bilal ibn Rabah, a Black African. There's so much history we don't know. And when we talk about African world history, there's so much that we just simply are unaware of that can free us from shame, that can free us from being second and third class citizens. And all this learning and knowledge of self doesn't mean that we have to be ugly or unkind or treat people in a way that's not human. I can unequivocally say, after 25 years of studying this, the ancient Egyptians were quintessential Black people.
Wow.
That's not Afrocentrism. That's a fact that European scholars and Arab scholars are now admitting wholeheartedly.
Wow.
It's a fact that they gave us science, math, astronomy, monotheism.
That's right. Yes.
The concept of monotheism comes out of the 18th dynasty in Egypt. I'm sorry, we say Kemet, but the society says Egypt. The concept of monotheism comes out of a quintessential Black family of the 18th dynasty. I can say with great deal of certainty that mankind and womankind has its origins on African soil. It's indisputable. The information is all laid out. These are things that people should know, not for the sake of self-aggrandizement, but just for the sake of just understanding human history.
Paul, there was so much I wanted to go back and get, but now you've taken me down a path, and I got to ask questions about this. So,
okay, I'm sorry, Mark. I'm sorry.
Remind me, brother. Like, you see how seamlessly he can navigate all these This is amazing.
Amazing.
See why I love this brother so much. So, what I wanted to ask before had to do with, your approach to your diversity work is fascinating because it's internal as opposed to external. It's always, well, how do we deal with these other people who are other?
Yeah.
And I think I see a stream in your work where people have to do some work on the inside, but we can talk about that later. I just texted you the other day because I had seen a posting on Facebook by someone that I'm guessing was Hispanic, and he was pushing back on the notion that there were Africans in this hemisphere before Columbus who were responsible for the Olmec sculptures that featured wide noses, full lips, etc. And could you share with the audience what you had shared with me?
Well, yeah. So we know that African people navigated to the Western Hemisphere in 3 waves now. Around 200 to 500,000 years ago, on foot, they migrated across continents.
On that natural bridge.
From that natural bridge. So the Aboriginal man of all land masses on the planet can be classified in strict science terms as what we call Africoid prototypes. Indisputable. The second wave, we came to the Western Hemisphere, is what Mark is referring to. Long before Columbus was even a thought in the universe, Africans from the West and East Coast were navigating to the Western Hemisphere. And the beauty of these Africans, they left the proof. See, it's not just enough to say who was Black and how was Black and when was Black. What did they do and what did they leave? So we know the parent civilization in Mesoamerica is actually the Olmec civilization, the parent civilization, which is a quintessential Africoid population that comes out of West Africa. Now, the third wave most people know about and most people like to talk about, and that's chattel slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. That's the area of our history that most people want to get stuck on. They want to stay there. They don't want to migrate from there. And sometimes for me, that's very difficult because although I know Harriet Tubman lived so that I can sit here today, that's a teeny portion of our history. And that portion of our history is directly tied to the rise of the European. Directly tied to the rise of the European. But that is a bleep in African world history.
Wow.
Now, let me throw this factoid out to you. This is going to blow your mind here. At least I think it may. Of recorded history that we've had on the planet Earth so far, 70% of that history has been an expression where African people have been at the center of the universe. So we're living in 2023. Let me do a quick timeline for you. 1400 years ago, Prophet Muhammad lives. 2000 years ago, the Prophet Jesus lives. 2500 years before that, we laid down the cornerstones and the foundation of what became the Great Pyramids. 800 to 1,000 years before that, the Grand Master Imhotep designs the Great Pyramid at Saqqara, the first multi-building built in stone. 3,000 years before Jesus the Christ walks the planet Earth, Africans had already laid down this foundation. There is no Greek civilization to be found anywhere on the planet. There are no Romans on the planet. Europe does not exist in the consciousness of anywhere on the planet. And Imhotep designs the step pyramid at Saqqara. Now, isn't it amazing that today our kids hate math?
Mm.
Isn't it today that our kids struggle to get through geometry and trigonometry and calculus, and we lay down the foundation of pi? This is the reason why knowledge of self becomes so very, very, very important. And all the while, nothing I'm saying is about Afrocentrism or pro-Black. It's just stating the simple and basic facts and truth. Mark and the other guys, I want you to understand, Nubia was so important. And because we're in a church context, I want to bring this home to some of the church listeners. Nubia and Kemet was so important that it's where Abraham sojourned. Am I right? It was so important that Jesus comes up out of Kemet and starts his ministry. Now, I'm not going to steal anything from the Hebrew culture, the Hebrew religion, folklore, and mythology. But I would be remiss if I didn't think both Abraham, Moses, and Jesus didn't study and practice at the Grand Lodge of Waset, or the Grand Lodge of Luxor, as it's known today.
Mm.
Very important. Now, I want you to understand that the pyramid is not Arab. Even though Arabs occupy Egypt today, they're not the original Kamites. We know exactly when they came to Egypt and when they conquered it. They were not there in the foundation.
You know, everything that you're saying, Paul, I don't know if you follow this in the news, but Kevin Hart had some of his touring dates canceled in Egypt because he was repeating some of the very things that you're saying. As someone who knows this and has studied this to this degree, how do you respond to people who push back on these ideas that you're sharing with us today?
the goal is to keep us perpetually ignorant. But you can't look. Let's look at Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, correct? You cannot keep, or around there, somewhere around there. You can't keep knowledgeable people by DNA down for too long. Less than 7 or 8 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, Black people are graduating with mortarboards and gowns on. Imagine you've been in chattel slavery for 300 years, and less than 15 years after that experience, now you having baccalaureate degrees. That's the DNA. That's the DNA. And I think that people feel quite comfortable in us not knowing or keeping us ignorant, but that party's over. Anybody that doesn't know now, it's because they don't want to know. Everything you want to know is in a book or has been written down somewhere. And it's important for us to lead and engage in such a way that this information is inspiring and it's helpful, but it's also about community building. Now, I want to go back to something that's very important, Mark, to my space, because I know there may be some listeners who are less inclined to want to talk about African world history, but more so about diversity and what I really do in that space. Can I just spend a few moments talking about that?
Oh, absolutely.
So, some of these corporations, if you look at their staff pictures today in 2023, it looks like the same staff pictures from 1933. We have more Latin, Native American, Black, brown women, and persons from the LGBTQ plus community who are qualified to be in these roles, but the pictures are still the same. And so what I've done through my diversity work, including my diversity firm to this very day, I work with organizations who want to move from philosophy to decision-making. How does knowing about privilege systems help you eradicate and make decisions differently than your organization did 5 months ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago?
Say that again, Paul. You want to see us move from what to what?
I want to see
philosophy to
decision-making skills. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. You can embrace Tim Wise all you want, or Peggy McIntosh, or Jane Elliott, or any of these great scholars. You can read the book Caste, or you can read a lot of books about diversity. If it doesn't show up in how you make decisions differently, it's just an intellectual exercise. So I work with leaders to get them to say, now, okay, you understand bias, you understand implicit associations, you understand all these new constructs. Here's how it has impacted you building your organization. Here's how this information can allow you to make decisions differently so that organizations begin to look more like communities and the nation, and not just a particular segment of the community and nation. And that's a hard job to do, but I've done it for so long that when organizations bring me in, now they understand that to have Paul James present, he's going to ask the hardcore questions. He's going to ask to look at your data. He's going to look at your data and say, I've noticed that you have 50 people in your organization, and 75% of them have all of the 75% that are in key roles, all of them have an undergraduate degree from Ohio State University. That's opportunity hoarding. We don't want that. We want to see what I call diversity in academic pedigree. We want to see a diversity of gender. We want to see a diversity of race and ethnicity, national origin, of language. And let's not confuse this with being woke. Let's not allow the political context of the day and these new euphemisms to get us thrown off track. Let's not go down that road of being woke. When a company invites me in, I don't even talk about being woke or these new phrases. I talk about what they want to do, how they want to do it, what the achievable goals are, and how do we get there on the timetable metrics. Period, full stop.
So I got to ask one more question. I'm sorry.
No,
Kyle, and I'm sorry,
you're fine.
Pastor Johnson. So this would be a question that I would ask you, in a text, but I'm just going to ask it publicly. I've had an issue for a long time in this discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've become someone who pushes back on the notion of inclusion for this reason. If someone is including you, you're always the guest. You're never the host. I don't like that at all. I'd love your take on that. Whether you agree or not, I'd love your take on that.
Well, I think, Mark, you're fundamentally right. But I always want to caution you, Mark, that you are a deep thinker.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. And most of the people in the workforce will never get to your level of thinking critically about words, meaning, and context. Words, meaning, and context. Let me give you an example. We would like to think that church communities are inclusive.
We like to think that.
We'd like to think that. We would like to think that church communities are intercultural and diverse. We'd like to think that. But I think your play or your positioning of inclusion is correct. But as a practitioner, when I'm working with a company or organization, I'm trying to get them to understand that inclusive excellence is tied to their bottom line. It's tied to their ability to understand their dollar imperative. It's tied to them understanding it can't be business as usual. It's tied to a lot of things. So I can't, although I agree with you in principle around this notion of inclusiveness, a lot of people that I work with.
I get what you're saying. You're saying that while it may be right philosophically, it may not have a lot of practical usage.
Sure.
In the workplace. But thank you for that, brother. Thank you.
Sure. I see a comment has come across by my big sister, and I'm duty bound because I sat at her feet to acknowledge. We call her Master Teacher Maskela Kemet, and so I'm duty bound to acknowledge her because without her, my intellectual paradigm wouldn't be what it is today. So I just wanted to highlight that. But getting to a couple of other phrases, Mark and others. The thing in my firm that I'm working with on now is not so much the diversity paradigm, but the equity and intercultural paradigm.
Say that again. Repeat that.
We're looking at, through my work and through my firm, how to help organizations achieve a greater degree of equity and a deeper understanding of intercultural awareness.
Wow.
Equity means access and opportunity that's real, genuine, and transparent. Now, let me tell you how equity works. You show me your mission statement. It has all these wonderful, beautiful sounding words. Then I say, send me your data. Let me see if your mission statement matches your data. And when I discover there's loopholes, then when I communicate with you, I say, you have an equity issue. You seem to only want to hire people from California, or you seem to only want to hire males or females, ... And so it's the equity proposition that I'm finding I'm getting a lot of traction. And increasingly, in my work, I'm using the word diversity less and less. And I'm leaning in on intercultural awareness because how we are interrelated across cultures is very important. And quite frankly, it's easy for people to understand. Let's be honest. For most of us, diversity is the default word for black and white. That's how it's shaped over the past 35 years. But this intercultural paradigms allows me to bring in a lot of different groups and possibilities and orientations as I help organizations achieve what they say on paper, at least philosophically.
Say a word about, and this is a topic that Pastor Kyle, we had a gentleman on, Dominique Gillibrand,
Gilliard,
who wrote a book that basically talks. He goes through the Bible basically and talks about how the Bible can be read as a story and epic about power and about how power is used either for the oppressed. In your work with diversity, equity, and inclusion, have you done any, substantive thinking on the issue of power? So when we talk about equity, when we talk about intercultural awareness, how much of that is tied to, at the end of the day, how people use power? And then if it is connected, then what is your message to companies, to churches, to leaders about that issue?
Everything's about power.
Yeah.
And the acquiesce of power. We owe Neely Fuller and Dr. Frances Cress Welsing for giving us a deeper understanding of the formation of how power works. Okay. Everything's about power, but power and privilege are hard to share.
Very hard to share. Yeah.
Unless we decide to be human.
Wow.
Unless we decide that there's enough resources to go around for everyone.
Can just give me 1 second, Paul. So basically, to misuse or to abuse power or to hoard power is what you just said is basically to function as less than fully human.
Totally.
Wow.
Love it.
Totally. And this is what made, hear me closely when I say this, what made Martin King so dangerous, so quick, so fast, is he was given a clarion call, and that call was against the power structure.
That's right.
Distribution of resources and goods so that all of us can prosper, such that all of us can have access. You can't have a man who has the best of the Baptist voices and the best of the Baptist teaching style and who can capture the nation through words. You can't have a man on the scene like that for too long. And I'm not talking conspiratorial theory here. I don't deal with conspiracy theories. I'm just talking fact. So power is the basis of how I work with organizations to get them to understand not just the redistribution of power, but the fundamental aspect of equity and access and opportunity.
Wow.
I can't call myself a true human being if every single thing that I do is simply for the benefit of people who look like me. That's a monster.
Wow.
But racism is a monster, isn't it?
It's a monster. It's a monster.
Sexism is a monster, isn't it?
It's a monster.
Classism is a monster, isn't it? We're talking about monsters.
Well, racism was one of his triplets: militarism, racism, and materialism.
Right.
Thank you. Absolutely. You know, one of the 41 books that I read last year was on Grandmaster Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yes.
Talk about a voice.
Yes.
Talk about a voice who spoke truth to power from the Mississippi Delta.
Yes.
And was unapologetically Black woman, female from the Delta, and rose and spoke truth to power. So it is all about power, but it is also about this. And this is where it's going to get kind of dicey, and I want to be careful with our time management here. So if you just let me know how we're doing on time, that'll be
You're good. You're good.
Okay. This is why I think a few moments ago I responded by calling on the names of Booker T. Washington and Mary McLeod Bethune. Okay, on one hand, we have a legitimate right through our desire to integrate to reap the full benefits of an open, free society. That's on one hand. On the other hand, Booker T, Mary McLeod Bethune, we have a right to take our talents and our skills in this market and use it for the benefit and uplift of our people, which is what all other oppressed people do. Now, let me give you an example of that. And I want the audience to listen to this very carefully. In Booker T. Washington's imagination, you don't have an NBA that's 70 to 75% of the entertainment value and less than 1% of the ownership value. In his world, that paradigm needs to be radically exploded. In his world, if you got an agency that has that much of your entertainment value, you should have an equal share in the market value. Imagine this. As much as we pride ourselves on the wealth of athletes and entertainers, we very rarely talk about the people that can afford to pay them that money based on their wealth and their material gain. Meanwhile, we very, very rarely are able to exercise that in such a way that an association like the National Basketball Association is benefiting the core elements of our community in terms of the disparities, in terms of health, wealth acquisition, access, and opportunity. So I just want to say this is important because I don't want the audience to be confused. As we were striving to integrate this society at a critical point and have social advancements that all of us have benefited from, we cannot lose the fact that what we gave up in that proposition is Black businesses, Black ownership, and Black accountability around excellence and doing for self. I was just in Kansas City. My niece got married in Kansas City recently, and some of us family members, we all went to the 18th and Vine District. We went to the Negro Baseball Museum, the Jazz Museum. That harkens back to a time when Black folks saw a need and they pulled together their resources and they built. It wasn't perfect. We got Satchel Paige out of that. We got Jackie Robinson out of that. We got Josh Gibson out of that. We wasn't slouches, right? Right?
That's right. That's right.
Let us remember that Benjamin Mays, let us remember all these great thinkers, they came from a segregated America. But look what they gave us when they was in those communities of love and support and decency and honor and integrity. And boy, I tell you, when you ride through Black neighborhoods now, I'm gonna tell you, we can pretend like we don't see it, but we've lost some traction, family.
We've lost some traction. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Speaking on that, by the way, Malcolm Gladwell does an amazing exposition of Topeka Brown versus Board of Education. Topeka Board of Education.
Sure, absolutely.
And talks about, like, did we really gain? Like, and he go and tells the behind the scenes story, the aftermath of what happened to a lot of Black educators.
Oh, yeah.
Then more heartbreaking, what happened to a lot of Black kids who all of a sudden were in classrooms where they were not being loved and embraced. They were seen as strangers, and how math score, achievement scores, academic scores started plummeting among Black kids. So that was one of the times that one of the instances that I know, that I'm aware of, that I know research has been done, and there are some question marks about how much progress was really made from what we call that landmark case in equity in education. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question? I'm so sorry. This was, I promise this is my last question, and I'll give up the floor. So, Paul, you worked at Duke, where
Yeah.
Dr. Darity is one of the leading figures in the country talking about reparations. I would love your take on that whole issue.
It's also, by the way, Duke is also the home, academic, intellectual home of John Hope Franklin out of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Talking about what Black people did post-slavery, what happened in the whole Greenwood deal within less than 40 years, what Black folks did there with nothing. But yeah, pick up with Mark's question.
well, but you should know, Pastor, that John Hope Franklin is my cousin.
Wow. What?
You should know, sir. Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
So this will be 30 seconds. 30 seconds. My grandfather, Lonnie James, his parents were Serena Franklin and Caesar James.
Wow.
My great grandma Serena was Buck Franklin's great aunt. Buck Franklin is the father of John Hope Franklin.
Wow.
So we got to remember now, if we're talking to each other, we're 2 to 3 degrees of separation, not 20 or 30.
Yeah.
But reparations. I may not see it in its lifetime, but the arc bends towards freedom, justice, and equality. And there is no doubt that African people worldwide are owed restitution for over 475 years of colonialism and chattel slavery combined. There is no doubt. And I think what's happening now from multiple sectors and quarters, a lot of people are putting their resources together and talking about what might reparations actually look like for the descendants of people who were enslaved. Most of the major Ivy League institutions have already published their studies on their involvement in the slave trade. Harvard being the chief among them, Brown being the chief among them,
Princeton.
Princeton,
Georgetown.
So I'm also for an algorithm. I think there's an algorithm of reparations that has to deal with mental health, physical health, land. I think it also has to do with dollars. And I think personally, this issue of reparations has to be taken to the United Nations. And I think it has to be handled in a world court of some sort. Because I don't think it's a matter of sending Paul James his $500,000 check. I don't think I don't reduce it to that kind of platitude. It has to be a holistic way of looking at systemically making amends for centuries of death and destruction that the planet is still wrestling with.
Yes.
And that is the poor little African. And how do we bring him and her out of a system of perpetual servitude? So reparations, yes.
The step beyond that too, Paul, is that I would hate to see any such effort solely focus on slavery when there's been a denial of equal justice up to today. We've been denied equal justice under the law up till today. It's not just, it's a continual injustice as opposed to, well, I had nothing to do with slavery, so I shouldn't have to pay for it.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, think about this.
Response, though.
Think about this. And this is going to be about reparations, but then it's also going to be about a system of oppression that impacts everybody consistently all the time. Think about this. not only did the European colonize human beings in an odd way, chattel slavery, but they also achieved colonizing the image of God.
Mhm.
Such that all over the world, when people close their eyes and see a Jesus figure, most of us see a rendition of a cousin of Michelangelo. Now, I want you to think about that. People who are classified as European today make up less than a third of the planet's population. This teeny minority on the planet has convinced the other 2/3 that even the conception of God is them. And that no angels, when you look at the pictures of heaven, nobody could even sneak in heaven who looked like me. Come on, family. Now, come on, this is ridiculous. But it's true. And we've got to deal with what this childish truth plays into colorism, heritage, last name, all these things that we think about that are superficial, all goes to being under this system of domination that unequivocally must at some point lead to a system of reparations of some sort. Will it happen in my lifetime? I'm not sure. Am I waiting? No. Is it realistic? Absolutely, because now the conversation is beginning to happen in multiple quarters and multiple intellectual platforms. And Sandy Darity has done towering work from an academy standpoint, but there's also been multiple grassroots efforts that's been on the battlefield since the late 60s, early 70s in terms of this reparations movement.
So, Paul, it is 8:24. So we've got
Yes.
about 6 minutes. We've got
Yes.
And what I'd like to do is for you to, and you've got to come back. This has been absolutely stunning and so rich. And we've just had an hour and a half of just constant, powerful insight and information. You've got to come back, and we can talk offline about when that is, when you can come back and be a part of and let us talk to you some more. But I'd like to for you to take 2 to 3 minutes and close out and just talk about your work, this work of understanding history, of self-understanding, self-love, diversity, equity, and inclusion, intercultural awareness. Talk about that and just give for church folk who are listening. Black church, predominantly Black churches, predominantly white churches. Pastor Kyle Lee's. Say a word to us about what would you like to see us do that could help move things along in terms of being a force for diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural awareness, dealing with the issue of power. Can you give us 2 or 3 things that you normally say to more faith-based, nonprofit faith-based groups in terms of the work you do?
Yes. Number one, promote opportunities that produce the greatest amount of uncomfortability in people.
Wow.
When people are uncomfortable, the needle moves. As long as people are stagnant, they have no real reason to change. Produce what I call righteous uncomfortability. And we can't produce righteous uncomfortability with us only being within our 4 walls. We got to get out. If we at a Black United Methodist Church, we got to sponsor meaningful conversations with white United Methodist churches. If we're uncomfortable with gender-related conversations and patriarchy, we got to have those conversations. Number 2, we must give people an opportunity to be wrong, so that way they can develop the attitude to be right. And so we must have patience with people where we find them and not where we hope or wish that they are in that process. And number 3, which I think is important, we've got to understand that no one is going anywhere soon. There's no alternative universe. We may occupy philosophically parallel universes, but we got to figure this right out right now on this earth. We've got to figure it out very quickly around some major issues like the environment, like capitalism, like faith,
Wow.
like race relations. We got to figure all this now. And I think, Pastor, although I do this work in corporate settings and in nonprofit settings, I think that the mosque, the church, the synagogue have a special responsibility.
Yeah.
Have a special responsibility
Ability.
to make this happen.
Yeah.
But we have to come to the proverbial tables as equals.
Yeah.
Coming to the tables as less thans,
Right.
or big I's and little U's, that doesn't work. My final comment would have to be this, because while I appreciate you inviting me to another section, I want to make sure I get this out at the end of this session.
Yes, sir.
Africa gave the world its first humanity. And I believe that African people have a special duty in the next 100 years to give the world its second humanity. And I want to say, I think we have a unique responsibility to role model what it means to be human. Because that's what our ancestors did on the banks of the Nile 10,000 years ago when they created the concept of Ma'at. And I'll end by giving you the meaning of Ma'at. It's a feminine principle. Truth, righteousness, harmony, and justice is the literal translation of Ma'at. African people must dare to reclaim Ma'at in all that we do, but more importantly, who we wish to become and how we want to be a part of leading this world out of some major trauma. Thank you for having me. I look forward to the possibility of coming back, and I hope I was able to challenge somebody as I have been challenged by the questions, and I hope I've been able to be true to my humanity as I've learned about the humanity of others.
You have been all of that on steroids. This has been absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful to you, Mark, for connecting us. And I'm so glad that I listened and so glad that you are here tonight. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation. I think you have so much to help the organizations, the nonprofit community, church, faith leaders, community leaders. There's so much of a wealth of wisdom from you, and so we've got to. I want to be at least one vehicle or one venue through which you get to share more of who you are and what you're doing with the world. I do see that you have Ralph Ellison behind you, by the way. I think that's your right. Is that over your right shoulder? I don't know how these screens. And I didn't get a chance to ask you about Invisible Man, but we'll have to talk about that next time. Sir, thank you so much. And I will follow up with you afterwards. Mark, thank you so much. I am going to let Mark and Paul go, and then Pastor Kyle and I are going to stay on. We have some church stuff announcements that we need to make, and we'll do that. But Paul, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on your amazing success. And,
Thank you.
And man, keep going, and let's build a network of other folks of kindred hearts and minds to build a movement to get this kind of humanity before the world. And
thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Final comment.
I would just like to say that I appreciate Pastor. We say in African pedagogy and thinking, we say something called the seen and unseen.
Yeah.
I appreciate your humanity.
Yeah.
That which I can see, but that which I can't see.
Yeah.
You are displaying courage by inviting diverse people to your platform. Wichita should cherish you. Wichita should love you. And I tell you, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person.
Wow.
Thank you very much for all that you do. You are making an impact, and I can feel it all the way here in the Research Triangle in North Carolina. Have a wonderful evening.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for those very kind words. Mark and Paul, we'll see you all later. I'll pull you all off. Pastor Kyle, you hang on. Wow. Wow, that was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That was great. All right, Pastor Kyle, let's jump in. We want you all to know next Wednesday, here's the lineup. We're so excited about Holy Week. I hope you're excited. It kicks off on Palm Sunday. And then on next Wednesday, we want you to come back. And this is what we're doing, Reflections on Holy Week and the Passion of Jesus. Along with Pastor Yolanda, we will also have Pastor Cindy Watson, the First United Methodist Church here in Wichita, and also Pastor Kirsty, who came out of St. Mark, but is serving in, I believe, Lincoln, Nebraska, ordained United Methodist pastor. They will be on with us, and we're going to just talk about Holy Week and give some reflections on that whole journey from Palm Sunday all the way to Easter. So we want you to be on with us. And then on Monday, we'll be back on Monday, Thursday together in person. St. Mark will host a Monday, Thursday service. Pastor Kyle is preaching. I want you to know it's 1 hour only. We will broadcast it on our normal outlets as we do on Sunday morning. So we want you to come in person, but if you can't be on person, you'll be able to catch it online. And then on that Good Friday, we will do a Good Friday service over at the Journey Church with Pastor Kyle, and it's going to be more of a liturgical, contemplative service. Again, 1 hour or less. And we'll be over there, and we're looking forward to having a great time with Pastor Kyle. Our first in-person visit with the Journey Church. On that Saturday, Linda and I and Chef JB will host another table experience. There are some seats left. Those folks that have come have had an amazing time. So if you want a seat, if you want to RSVP, reach out to me through Facebook, inbox me, or text me. Most of y'all have my number, have my phone number. This graphic, this flyer is on my Facebook page. You can find this flyer, and my number is there in the information. My email is there. You can send me a note and reserve your spot, and I hope you will. So we have an absolutely amazing time, and this particular table experience will focus on Holy Saturday, and then of course at St. Mark we'll celebrate Easter. But so Pastor Kyle, you all celebrate Easter too. Any other announcements, Pastor Kyle, that's stuff that's happening just at the Journey that you want to make folks aware of?
Not in particular, but I will just say what I've been sharing with my folks at the Journey. I think Holy Week in particular is such an opportunity to soak it in. And I know not everybody is a big fan of extra church services, but these really are designed to serve us. I mean, our schedules are busy, right? Everybody is busy, and it's like every night. And and I get that, but these services aren't meant to be busyness.
Right.
In fact, they're meant to fill us and just to settle in. So I just really encourage everybody to do whatever they can that week, and I would love to see folks. I'll be out at St. Mark for Maundy Thursday. I would love to see as many people there as possible, and then we'll be hosting on Friday, and would love to see as many St. Mark folk as possible. So please utilize this opportunity to experience Holy Week.
And then, Pastor Kyle, just FYI, the week following that, I don't know if you've kept up with the information that's going on with DART, Direct Action Research Training. So we're doing a big laity training on April 20th, I believe. And then on that Wednesday before that, I will have on the guy who is kind of like a regional director for DART. He's in Lawrence, Kansas. He'll be on and a couple other people with you. And one of the things we're going to talk about that we're going to talk about DART and the big meeting coming up, but we're also going to talk about power, because one of the things that DART focuses on is changing changing the narrative for Christians about giving up power, or just giving away your power, giving up power for the sake of the least, but also using power for the sake of the oppressed. So I'm looking forward to a riveting conversation around that with you. Thank you so much, Kyle. You're such a good friend. Thank you for practicing, taking initiative and practicing a lot of what Paul talked about tonight in terms of reaching across the boundaries and taking the steps that it takes to build community and value the humanity of others. You did that for me. I can't thank you enough for that, because this has been such a rich and abounding friendship. Thank you for helping to host tonight. Mark McCormick, thank you for helping us to host tonight. You made tonight absolutely great. Thank you, man. Thank you so much for Paul.
I took up more space.
No, you didn't.
That was good.
But you see why I thought that he would be a good guest.
You nailed it.
This brother, man, he'll have you yelling out, "Make it plain, brother.
Exactly.
Pull the covers back, brother."
Absolutely. He is a profound intellect and human being. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Y'all have a great night. Mark, I will follow up. You know, I've got some follow-up conversation to do with you about some stuff. And
Sure.
I'll touch bases with you. So we'll make sure we're getting on.
Love you all. Thank you.
Yeah, love you guys. Talk to you later. Good night, folks. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you St. Mark on Sunday in person or online. And then we look forward to an amazing Holy Week journey. Good night.